There's no such thing as multitask. And so my question to you is, how do you manage in a world that requires a lot of steps, a lot of complexity, and is full demands? How do you manage in that world? How do you help your employees keep all those balls in the air, right? Because no employee says, I come into work every day and I just turn on my computer and hit the F2 key every hour. I want to talk about a special topic, really. And I want to talk particularly about the topic of scaling. And scaling is not just growing, right? Not just getting new clients, not just increasing revenue, but making sure that you do it in a way that you stay profitable, and not just profitable, but within your target allocation percentages. And today, particularly, I want to talk about a concept called simplify to multiply. And it's an interesting topic because a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, most of us started our business from scratch. So we didn't inherit a business. We didn't have a business passed down to us. Most of us did not acquire a business. So we started these businesses from scratch. And with us starting these businesses from scratch, we were the ones that was our first sales department, right? We brought in our first customers. When we brought in those customers, we were the ones who fulfilled that order too, right? Because there was nobody else there to fulfill that order. And some of you guys are still doing your own bookkeeping out there, right? So we did a lot of our back office work too when we started these businesses. And it's interesting because along the way, as we were starting these businesses, getting new clients, doing our own fulfillment, we kind of created our own processes, right? We kind of figured out the fastest way for us to get it done, right? Get it done efficiently, get it done with great quality. Sometimes we documented how we did it, but most of the time we probably didn't, right? We used something called intuition. And truthfully, a lot of that know-how, a lot of that specialty, a lot of that really was in our head, right? It was in our head, and it wasn't a problem because we didn't have to transfer that knowledge to anybody. And as we grew, right, as business owners, as we added at first employee, right? That employee just had to stand back and observe what we did, right? They just took notes, right? They just watched what we did. They replicated that process. And as our business started to grow and we started to add more employees, we were actually looking around, and what we found was that everybody had somehow developed their own way of doing things, right? Because you could teach the next one, and then the next level has to teach the next level, right? And eventually, some of those processes that we started and that initially, they got diluted, right? As we passed down that information, or different people passed down that information to other people. And it was interesting because as people were developing their own way of doing things, their own way of accomplishing it, some had figured out how to create a faster process, right? Some people were faster at what they were doing. Some people were more efficient, right? Some people were less efficient. Some people were great at problem solving, and they were really good at navigating through those unexpected circumstances. And then some people, they just looked at it like, oh my gosh, like a deer in a headlight. Like, what do I do now that it's not working the way that I thought it would work? And it was interesting because one of the things that business owners don't realize, right, as they're starting their businesses, as they're growing their businesses, they don't realize that they're probably actually geniuses at what they do, right? And these business owners, a lot of time they start these businesses because they have a calling, right? They have a special calling. There's artistic sense with them. There's a creative genius in them, right? And they start these businesses really to create their work, their art, right? Whether it's a cleaner, whether it's a tradesman, whether it's a engineer or attorney, right? Or doctor, they're drawn to these businesses because they're working in their calling. They're working in their zone of genius. And each job that they took, or each project that they accepted, right, they took it as if it was a custom job, right? Like, ooh, I get to work on this. Ooh, I get to help do this. I get to invent this. I get to help make this better for you. And that meant, like, if you were asking for green trim, we made that trim green if we normally make it brown, right? And as easy as it was for the business owner to do their job, because this is their operating zone of genius, as this business grew, right, that skill became harder and harder, right, to transfer, right, as new members join the team, because now the business owner is much busier. He's relying on his team to train new team members that are coming in. And so that knowledge, that skill just wasn't transferring over in that easy way. And the people that got hired, especially later on in the game, as there was some growth, they just didn't seem to get it as easy, right? They just didn't seem to get it as easy. And they had a hard time following the examples that were set, right? So if you had some examples and said, hey, just go ahead and do what I did before, they had a hard time following that. They had a hard time making those judgment calls, and they had a hard time figuring out, how do I fix what's broken and how do I proceed when something just doesn't follow the protocol, right? Something is just out of the extraordinary. It's just one of those isolated situations. These people that came later on, they had a hard time figuring out, how do I follow this if it's not working out exactly how I expected? In our firm, we even struggle with this, right? We even struggle with this scaling topic. And there were times that we would bang our heads and we would make comments like, those millennials, like, what are they teaching those millennials in schools? Or don't they just teach common sense in school? And then, hey, maybe we're just geniuses, right? And by the way, if you find yourself needing common sense to do your job, you don't have very good processes. As a business owner, if you're relying on common sense to get the job done, right? And you're relying that your people have common sense, you don't have good response. You don't have good processes. And it's your responsibility as an employer to provide processes and systems in place where your team can learn it without common sense, right? That is your job, to be able to create those processes that you can scale, that people can really understand. And it's your responsibility as a leader to communicate in a way that your team member is able to receive it, right? And because, if any of you guys have children, you know that children learn different ways. And sometimes you have to communicate in a way that that child can understand what it needs. And that's the same with your team member. You have to be able to communicate in a way that they can receive it, that they can digest it, that they can be motivated to act on change. And so here we are with, people unable to adapt to these one-off situations, delays in making deadlines, and ultimately inefficiencies that result in even lower profits, right? And what happens in these situations is there's a lot of time that's being required of the owner, because the owner constantly has to jump back in, fix problems, or retrain, right? In these cases. And so today, what I want to do is I want to talk about a concept called simplify to multiply, simplify to modify. And what I mean by this is, how do you scale and do it faster while doing it less? How many of you guys know of the company Amazon? And I love Amazon. I love getting packages. And I have to admit, I order so much from Amazon. Sometimes I get a package and I'm like, what is in this package? It's like ordering myself a surprise. And I love it because, you order something on Amazon and like clockwork, it just shows up like a day or two later on your doorstep, right? Well, it's interesting because Amazon has the same problems that a lot of small businesses have, right? Amazon's a large business, but large businesses, small businesses, we got the same problem. And Amazon has a hard time keeping its employees, right? Especially because it's hiring that very competitive market right now, which is that blue collar worker, right? And Amazon is having a hard time keeping these employees just like we are. And Amazon, they try to offer competitive wages. They try to offer benefits, right? But the reality is the days are long, right? The days are long. Overtime is often needed. And sometimes those boxes are pretty heavy, right? They're pretty hard on your body because you're constantly lifting boxes. And most employees that Amazon hires, they don't stay very long. They don't stay very long. And so to have that ability or that gift for someone to stay 90 days to learn their job and get good at it, well, they don't have that luxury, right? Because the likelihood of someone staying 90 days and getting good at their job is very, very rare. And so Amazon had a challenge. Amazon had to figure out, how do I make someone effective to not only show up and learn his job, but learn his job quickly, because they knew that they were going to have turnover. They knew that that person wasn't going to stay very long. And so they needed to be able to figure out, how do I get this person that's a gift for today, because they might not come back tomorrow, and really be able to get the most productivity out of this person without taking 90 days to get them up to speed. And I mean, Amazon had to figure out, how do I get this person up to speed within 3 business days, right? 3 business days of starting their job. And Amazon had to look at each of their team members as a blessing, and they had to figure out, how do I quickly do this? And so what Amazon did was they learned to simplify in order to multiply. They had to learn how to make each job so simple, right, that anyone could walk onto the assembly line and quickly learn the job, right? And so today, what I want to do is I want to talk about that concept. I want to talk about that concept of simplify to multiply, and how to simplify in order to scale effectively. So my first point is, and you want to grab your pencil because this is going to be good, right? Is entrepreneurs are craftsmen. Okay. So entrepreneurs you guys aren't normal people. Okay. You guys are craftsmen. When it comes to doing your profession, you're going to notice that one off. You're going to notice that 1 centimeter off isn't right. You're going to notice that spot on the wall. And you're going to notice that things that 99% of the population would not notice. Okay. Because you are a craftsman as an entrepreneur. And many of you, you probably know your craft so well, right? That you probably got intuition when things aren't right, right? You could probably do your job with your eyes closed. You can do it from memory. You don't need anything written down. You just know what to do. You can't describe how you just know what you do. And many of you might actually be considered gifted in the professions that you've chosen, which is why you chose that profession, because it gave you so much joy. It gave you so much gift that you wanted to impact other people. And so you're able to learn your trade faster than most of your peers. And hence, that's why you're running the show. That's why you're running the show. But here's a truth bomb. Here's a truth bomb from you. Most of your employees, most of your team members will never be able to achieve half of what you're able to achieve. And most of your employees, your team members will never make it to the technical level that you've been able to achieve, right? They just won't. That's just the reality. You've heard the concept that if your employee can get 80% of what you can be, then they're a good employee, right? Because, you're in your zone of genius usually when you start your business. You're starting this business because it's art for you, right? You're creating 16 chapels and whatever you're doing, right? And so while many people argue that you should only hire A players, and I agree, when you hire an A player, somebody that's talented at what they do, it's going to be a lot easier to train that person, right? When you hire an A player. But the truth is, A players only make up the top 5% of any profession. The top 5%, that's heads. And the truth is, those A players didn't wake up A players, right? They didn't wake up born out of their mom's womb and go, I'm an A player. No A player comes out that way. In fact, most A players are molded into A players, right? They come on as the rookie and then they're molded to become the expert that they become. And most of these A players, they are molded through critical feedback, getting that tough lesson, that tough feedback, like you did it wrong, you need to do it right next time. They're molded through education, right? They've invested in their own education or someone has invested in it for them. They've learned from the school of hard knocks, right? They've made mistakes. They've had to pick themselves up, right? They've made more mistakes. And most of them have built something called grit over time, that ability to take a shove, to take that fall down and get back up, right? That's how A players are made. They're made through the hard knocks of life, right? And to scale a multi-7-figure business, you're going to need to work with many people from many different levels of education and experience, right? Just like Amazon, it's going to take all people to get to that income. And especially when you're in hyper growth, meaning you are doubling your business, you're adding 30% growth, 40% of growth every year, you're going to need to learn to mold people quickly from being your least valuable player to being your most valuable player, right? From the least valuable player to the most valuable player. You're going to have to learn to mold them quickly. And so I want to challenge you today. A lot of people tell me it's hard to hire, it's hard to find people. I'm going to challenge you today with a concept. What if anyone could be an A player? What if anybody could be an A player? What if A players are actually made, not born? And what if this theory was true? If this theory was true that A players are actually made and not born, how would you go about creating an A player? To create an A player, it's going to require the following steps. It's going to require that you simplify your processes. It's going to require that you train and retrain and keep training, right? It's going to require mentoring, right? It's that holding that hand and saying, hey, I've been there before. You can do this better. Let me challenge you. It's going to require creating processes that are easy to digest so that anyone who's just average, right? Average can easily follow that process. That's what it's going to require. And so today I want to talk about how do you create processes so that the average person can follow the process, right? Because we live in a world where we got to have average people being able to perform like they're A players, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to standardize. And when I talk about standardize, I mean, create SOPs, create those standard operating procedures. What is written down can be followed. If it's in your mind, well, it's just in your mind. That if it's in your mind, you cannot transfer that knowledge, right? You cannot scale if all the information is in your mind. So write down the steps that need to be done. And it's interesting because, science has proven that people learn different ways, right? We've got people that are visual learners. We got people that can listen and learn. We've got people that are very tactical. They just need to jump in and do it with their hands. And that's how they learn. And so like when I create training processes, I like to create training processes that actually include all three methods of learning. I like to create instructions that they can go back and read over and over again. I like to create videos that they can watch. And a lot of times, when we're hiring new people, I like to have them shadow a more experienced team member so they can follow the steps and learn those steps that are being performed. I remember when I was graduating from school and all the job ads that everyone had said it's important that you got to be able to multitask, right? You got to be able to multitask. And all the job posts said you must have that ability to multitask. And you had to be able to really be able to adapt really rapidly when things were changing constantly. And you were required to do many things at once. Things like answering the phones while at the same time sending out an email, while at the same time filing that paper away because you got to stay organized. You don't want paper everywhere, while at the same time getting your main job done, right? That was the message that they told us when we were getting out of school. And although some people can handle that level of complexity, because some people can handle it, that top 5%, right, that we're talking about, the majority of people that are going to be available in your market, majority of people that are going to be available to hire, they're not going to be able to handle that multitask, right? And what's actually happened when people called it multitasking and actually doing many things at one time, what was happening was the mind was actually just switching, right? Meaning that it was focusing on one task and then stopping and focusing on another task. It was just a switching of the different topics and working on one thing. And it was just stopping as you worked on another thing, right? That's really what was going on in the science of the mind. And if you kept doing this long enough and you kept adding to your list of to-dos and things that you were juggling and you were doing this all the time, well, what happened was, you just didn't do anything really well, right? You just didn't do anything really well at the end of the day. And so now science is telling us that there's no such thing as multitasking, is what science is saying. And so my question to you is, how do you manage in a world that requires a lot of steps, a lot of complexity, and is full of demands? How do you manage in that world, right? How do you help your employees keep all those balls in the air, right? Because no employee says, I come into work every day and I just turn on my computer and hit the F2 key every hour. No employee does that. Every employee has many different tasks that they have to juggle. But now that we know there's no such thing as multitasking, how do we allow our employees to do that easy? So one of the things that helps is create a checklist. They say that when pilots get into a plane, there's so many things that they have to do, so many switches, so many things that have to be calibrated. And if they miss one of those things, they're putting all of their passengers in danger. And so one of the things that pilots do is they create a checklist, right, before they fly off. And if you create a checklist, what you're doing is you're requiring your team to check off the steps that they're required to perform, and they're making sure that they complete each required step. And I have to confess, I use checklists for everything. If I'm going on a trip, I have to create a checklist of, Suzanne, make sure these things are in your bag. Because, when you're dropping off kids at school, you got to be able to write this down. And a checklist can be used to make sure all the steps are being followed and all the steps are being completed. I like to create videos. I like to create videos of tasks being formed. I use a software called Loom. Sometimes I use software called Zoom, right? And I just use the recording function. And what I'm doing is I'm creating videos of me performing the steps. And not only am I creating a video of me performing the step, and, you can use your video camera on your phone, but, I'm actually talking through the task. I'm talking through what I'm doing. And, I look back now and we've got a whole library full of videos of different things that our team can learn on. And I save these videos in our library every time I create one. And we have videos that now several staff have watched these videos. And anytime they're learning a new task, I say, just check out this video here. And they go back and watch it. And these videos are so detailed. So detailed that a lot of times they don't even have to follow up and have questions. So as you're doing your video, what you want to do is you want to think about everything that's required in that step when you're creating that video. What are some common questions that you had when you were learning it? What are some common questions that your team members have when they're learning it? What are some exceptions that you're seeing? What are the things that are constantly being broken or not being done right? And make sure you address those things that you're seeing in those videos. How do you handle those exceptions that you're seeing? And what are some common situations that might occur that you should also include in that video, right? And then show them, how are you thinking through that problem solving? How are you thinking through that video? What is your thought process in that video and that task? And convey that through your video, convey that thought process, convey that reasoning, right? Because you want to teach your team members how to think through those exceptions. And the next thing is, don't overwhelm, right? People got enough on their plate. Don't overwhelm, reduce for effectiveness. The Pareto principle teaches us that 20% of our activities are going to contribute to 80% of our bottom line, meaning that 80% of what we're doing is probably a waste of time and money, right? So we really want to focus on that 20% that's really adding to that bottom line, the 20% that has the greatest margins, right? And my question for you is, what are your 20% of activities that's creating 80% of your profitability? Can you get rid of those activities that are not contributing to 80% of your profitability? And imagine how much easier it would be to teach your staff if you had less to teach them, right? Because if they don't have to learn, this process and this process, they can just learn the processes that really matter, that contribute to your bottom line. Imagine how easier it would be to scale your business. And I know that this is definitely easier said than done. You'll think to yourself, I put so much effort in growing this part of the business. I know it's not super profitable. It's not adding to a lot to the profits, but I put a whole lot into this part of the business. I've invested so much money. I spent so much time. I totally get it. I get what it is having to count the cost of letting something go. But imagine what resources you're tying up, right? By not focusing on the things that really impact your bottom line, right? What resources could you free up by letting those things go? And consider removing those services and products that don't contribute substantially to your bottom line. Consider removing them. The next step is take a look at your processes. Take a look at your processes, and your team member responsibilities. Is there a way of simplifying that process? I occasionally sit down with my team members and I observe their processes. I just watch what they're doing. And anything that isn't contributing significantly to the process or can be removed, and we probably wouldn't miss it, I go ahead and remove it, right? So I look for redundancies. I look for opportunities to consolidate. I look for opportunities whereby doing one thing automatically contributes to another. So I'm looking for automation with that. And I look for those opportunities to automate, opportunities to remove the people. Is there a software or some type of equipment that I can do this that doesn't require the labor resources? Or is there an outsourcing opportunity that someone just does this better than me that would be better if we just outsource that part of the process? And again, what I'm saying is the less steps, the better, right? We're simplifying steps. We're making the job easier. I used to email every task that came to my mind. So if I thought about something, I would email my assistant the task, or I would email one of my staff member a task. It was interesting because as I emailed the staff person, or I picked up the phone and called them, right, the person would write down the task on their notebook. And if they wrote it down, sometimes they did it, sometimes they didn't, right? That's the reality. And if I didn't see a lot of movement, then I might call or send another email to follow up. And I found this thing in Microsoft. It's called Microsoft To Do. And it's really neat because I can actually put the task in Microsoft To Do and I can send it to that person automatically. And as this person finishes up the task and they complete the task, or if they're in between completing the task, they can put notes on it. It automatically updates my side so I can see where the task is at any given time. And when it's complete, it actually marks it off my to-do list on their side. So again, we're using that automation to reduce that follow-up and making sure those things get done, right? And now I don't have to follow up on task anymore. And so, instead of having your admin book meetings, another thing you could do is create a calendar link, right? And send it out. And if that requires a Zoom link, you can create a Zoom link through Zapier, right? That creates that Zoom link automatically when that meeting is scheduled. And again, the less mundane things that your team has to do, the less chasing of people, right? Because it's hard to capture people. It's hard to schedule people. The more he or she is going to be available to concentrate on the bigger, more important things. So what I'm doing is getting off those mundane tasks off their list. And eventually you're going to require less people with all that automation, which is going to help you grow your bottom line. So in summary, what I'm saying is simplify to multiply, simplify to multiply. When you make your processes more simple, the easier it is for your team to learn it. When you're efficient with your services or product offerings, you're only focusing on your zone of genius, you're only focused on your Pareto principle, you're going to require less complexity, right? And what's going to happen is your employees are going to be able to learn the task faster, right? When you have less complex processes, your employees are going to be able to learn that task faster. Kind of like Amazon. That person needs to learn their job within 3 days. They need to become an expert in 3 days. So when you make things more simple, you'll be able to put employees into that position to quickly learn. And also, multitasking is a myth, right? Multitasking is a myth. And A players are made, not born, right? A players are made, not born. So make it easier for your team members to become A players. Make it easier for your team members to be successful so that the average person can do the job, right? Create that checklist to help them succeed and create accountability when steps are not followed. And make it easier for your employees, right? Your team members to learn the job. Reduce that complexity. Automate before you delegate, right? Find software, machines, anything before you have to bring on headcount. Focus on product and services that most build your bottom line, that have the greatest margins. Create those training videos so you and your team don't have to be demonstrating all the time, right? You create that library that you can use and reuse all the time. And again, simplify to multiply, simplify to multiply. How can I make this easier for my team member to learn it? How do I make it easier to get this task done with less people? How do I reduce redundancy of steps? How do I automate to make sure it captures more than one steps in a process, right? Simplify to multiply is a theme. So I hope that today was extremely helpful for you guys. Thanks a lot.